Hello everybody, I'm Dan Murrell here with my review of Shelby Oaks, which opens in theaters this weekend. I saw it at AMC's Scream Unseen on Monday night. Now, if you don't know, Shelby Oaks is the feature debut of writer-director Chris Stuckmann, who also happens to have gotten his start as a movie critic right here on YouTube. And many people have asked me in the last several weeks if I'm going to be reviewing this movie here on the channel, and I didn't quite know what to tell them because I'm in a bit of a tricky position here. On one hand, this is a movie that is of great interest to many of you watching because of Chris's start as a YouTube movie critic, because it's the kind of movie that a lot of people want to hear a review of. It's a big mainstream horror movie. Neon is distributing it. Mike Flanagan came on board as a producer and consultant. On the other hand, I know Chris. He did a lot of work with Screen Junkies several years back. I met him several times. We talked a bit when I launched my own channel. He was very helpful with some advice. I donated to the Kickstarter for this movie. And so it could be argued that maybe I shouldn't review the film for those reasons. But I ultimately decided to do it because I don't think that it should be treated any differently than any other movie. And I think that Chris would probably agree with that. So going into the film, I did what I do with every movie. When people say, well, do you go into a Transformers movie already hating it? No, I set aside my feelings about the previous Transformers films and approach each movie on its own terms. And I did the same with Shelby Oaks. Now, there are some feelings that I have that are tied to the fact that Chris made it, but that does not change how I feel about the film. It does not change my opinion of the film in this review. The movie focuses on the disappearance of Riley Brennan, played by actress Sarah Dern, co-host of a YouTube channel called The Paranormal Paranoids. Years after the murder of her fellow hosts and Riley's disappearance, Riley's sister Mia, played by Camille Sullivan, finds new clues that might lead her to what exactly happened to Riley. Her search takes her down a dark path that ties all the way back to their childhood together and a menacing presence that has stalked the two sisters all their lives. Shelby Oaks is told at first through found footage, and I've seen it referred to as a found footage horror movie, but that's only about the first, I'd say, 20 to 30 minutes and then some chunks in the middle of the film. After the initial found footage chunk, which really is an avenue, a way to introduce us to the backstory of the film and the world where the film takes place, we go to a more traditional horror narrative or narrative structure, and I actually liked that transition, really mainly because found footage has been done so many different times that there's only so many different ways to do it. And I think that once you go to the more narrative structure, then the movie is allowed to exist on its own terms just a little bit more. And it's when it's allowed to exist on those terms that I think the movie really starts to take off. I think this is a very good looking film. The cinematography is from Andrew Scott Baird, who's done projects in the past, but I'd be surprised if he doesn't get work on even more high profile films after this one, because making an inexpensive movie look not cheap is very difficult to do, but the cinematography in this film is very well done. Something lurking in the darkness is a constant threat in Shelby Oaks, and Baird creates an enveloping kind of existential feeling darkness that really, really works well. And one of the big takeaways for me is that it's very obvious that Chris, and I'm just going to say Chris because it's weird if I say Stuckmann because anyway, it's obvious to me that Chris understands the essentials, understands the fundamentals of how to direct a movie like this, the language of cinema. That's probably not a big surprise considering that he examined it for so many years on YouTube before doing this. Right off the bat, he's good at the basics, particularly in getting good performances out of his actors. The bulk of this film falls on Camille Sullivan and her performance, and she acquits herself very well. It was a nice bit of casting. And looking at the movie overall, I think that all the roles featured very good performances. And when we talk about the horror genre in general, big budget or small budget, good acting isn't necessarily something that's present in every horror movie, but I think that all of the roles in this movie were well cast and the performances are solid. I also think that Shelby Oaks shows a filmmaker who has a good handle on the craft of filmmaking, both shooting and in the editing room. I am famously a bit of a wimp when it comes to horror movies. And one of the things that really sets me on edge the most is when you have these sequences that are crafted so that I am kind of tensed up and on the edge of my seat and wondering what's going to happen next or where the next scare is coming from. And Shelby Oaks does this a lot. There are several sequences throughout that had me, I'm not going to say on the edge of my seat, but pushed all the way back in the back of my seat. There were several effective scares, and there were a few moments that genuinely did creep me out, that have kind of given me the chills when I'm walking around in the dark at night around the house. There were a few jump scares that I might categorize as kind of cheap jump scares, which, if you know me, I'm not a huge fan of, but the build up to those scares was very well done. And really, I think that this is not a case of somebody who is able to watch a bunch of movies and just replicate what they saw. This doesn't feel like, or didn't feel like, a recreation of a horror movie to me. I think the ability to build a genuine aura of suspense and to pace a movie like this properly is a talent. It's a skill. And I think that that talent is on display here. Where I think Shelby Oaks is not as successful is in the screenwriting department. I think that the strong performances and the well-crafted atmosphere paper over a lot of things that I had an issue with the script. I think that the first half of the movie works a lot better than the second half when we're setting up what this world is, when we're setting things up that you hope are going to pay off later on in the film. But once we get around the middle, it becomes, for a while, just a few different sequences of creeping around in the dark with the flashlight. There were two actually kind of back to back with each other that I felt were a little bit repetitive. And then when we got to the end, I could see where we were wanting to go with the ending a little bit, but I think that it was a bit rushed and a little bit more confusing than it should have been. I think there should have been more work done on the ending of the film. And this is an issue that is common in a lot of horror movies, the idea of a setup that's better than the execution. It's something I'm going to talk about in a bigger video I'm working on that's going to come out before Halloween. I was hoping that Shelby Oaks would be able to avoid that, but I think that it does fall victim to that in the same way that a lot of other horror films have done. It is a little bit perhaps easier to draw an audience in to an interesting premise than to figure out exactly how to pay that premise off. Viewing the film, setting my personal feelings aside, which I think is something that every critic has to do for just about any movie to one degree or another, I am very confident that even if I did not know who Chris Stuckmann was and didn't really know anything about this project, if I just saw it blind, I genuinely believe that I would come out of it saying this was a really interesting work, a really interesting film from a promising young director. I'm excited to see how Chris develops in the future as a screenwriter. In the short term, I would love to see him work with a co-writer or perhaps find a script from somebody else that he is excited to make, because the fundamentals are there. I think that he shows very clearly in this film that he has the talent and the ability to make an effective horror movie. It's just about finding the pairing with the right material to channel that talent through. So on my personal scale, I think that there are a lot of good things in this movie, but if I'm being honest with myself and honest with you, the audience, I would have to put it at an it's fine. Again, with the caveat that I think that there's a lot to like in the film. And on a personal note, I know how much Chris Stuckmann loves movies. I know how much movies mean to him, and I know how much this movie in particular means to him. And when you look at his roots as an online critic, the most common response that critics online and print for decades now usually get from people, because as a critic, you often have to sit, as I just have, or as many others do, and say what you don't think is right about a movie or a TV show. The most common thing that you hear from people is, okay, well, if you know so much, where's your movie? Where's your TV show? And I have to say that I respect Chris for having the motivation and the talent to actually put his money where his mouth is and say, here's my movie. And I admire that. To be quite frank, Chris and Jeremy Johns and a lot of people that were in that sort of first generation of movie YouTube have been people that I've looked up to for a very long time. Their model and their success is what I have aspired to in building my own channel. I haven't come anywhere close to what they have built over the last 5 years, but it's still something that I work toward, and I respect Chris a lot for what he's already done here on YouTube. And I look forward to seeing what the next step is for Chris, because I'm so happy with the opportunity that he really made for himself and the opportunity that he had to attract so many people to this film and to now have it out in theaters. I think this next step is going to be a really good one. So those are my thoughts on Shelby Oaks. What do you think? Are you going to be heading to theaters to see it this weekend? Let me know down in the comments below. And as always, if you're not subscribed, hit that subscribe button. Be sure to hit the bell so you're notified when I put up a new video. But most of all, thank you for watching this video. Until next time, stay safe, and I'll see you then. Bye.